Jake Morrison checked his datapad for the third time that hour. The security protocols for the diplomatic station were tight, but he always believed in double-checking everything. He had been working as a security consultant on Harmony Point for 2 years now, and he knew that the most dangerous moments came when everyone else felt safe. Today was one of those days that made station commanders nervous. The Velrothi were coming. Jake had read everything available about the Velrothi in the human database, which was not much. They were an old species, one of the oldest in the galaxy. Their empire had stood for thousands of years while humanity was still figuring out fire. They looked almost like living crystal sculptures, with bodies that seemed to catch and reflect light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Their skin had a translucent quality, with veins of color running through it like precious metals in stone. What made today important was that this was their first official diplomatic contact with humanity. Before now, the Velrothi had kept humans at a distance, watching and studying from afar. They had standards that needed to be met before they would consider formal relations. Apparently, humanity had finally passed whatever tests they had been running. The docking bay doors opened with a smooth whisper of hydraulics. Jake straightened his posture and kept his hand near his sidearm, not touching it but ready. 6 Velrothi guards emerged first, moving in perfect formation. Their armor looked ceremonial, but Jake could see the power cells built into it. These were not just for show. Then came the royal family. Queen Teshvara walked with a grace that seemed impossible. She was tall, perhaps 7 feet, and her body reflected light in shades of deep blue and silver. Her face was narrow and elegant, with large eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Behind her walked a smaller figure, clearly younger. Princess Lysizara was perhaps 5 feet tall, her crystalline features still developing the full complexity of an adult Velrothi. She looked around the docking bay with obvious curiosity, her colors shifting toward lighter blues and greens. Station Commander Phillips greeted them with the formal words that had been prepared by the diplomatic corps. Jake tuned out most of it. His job was not to listen to speeches. His job was to watch for threats. The ceremony moved to the main diplomatic hall, a large circular room with a transparent dome showing the stars above. Representatives from a dozen species had gathered to witness this historic moment. Jake positioned himself near one of the support columns, his eyes constantly moving across the crowd. The Velrothi had requested a cultural exchange as part of the ceremony. It was their way, Jake had learned, to share traditions before discussing practical matters. Queen Teshvara explained that they would perform a ritual dance that demonstrated the relationship between ruler and subjects. It was called the Circle of Trust. The 6 Velrothi guards formed a wide circle around the princess. Then, as music began to play from their equipment, they started to move in a synchronized pattern. The princess stood in the center, alone and exposed. Jake realized the symbolism. The guards were showing their trust by not standing directly beside her. They were proving that their society was safe enough that even the heir to the throne could stand undefended. Jake thought it was a dangerous tradition. He was watching the guards move through their pattern when he saw it. A flicker of movement in the crowd. 3 Velrothi who had been standing among the observers were reaching into their formal robes. Jake's training took over before his conscious mind finished processing the threat. He ran. The ceremonial guards were halfway through their rotation, too far from the princess to reach her in time. The attackers pulled out weapons that looked like crystalline rods. Jake knew enough about energy weapons to recognize the capacitors building charge. He had maybe 2 seconds. Jake hit the princess from the side, wrapping his arms around her and twisting to put his body between her and the attackers. The princess made a sound of surprise and confusion. Then the world turned white and hot. The plasma bolt hit Jake's left shoulder and back. His security vest absorbed some of it, but the heat went through and found flesh. Jake heard himself make a sound that was not quite a scream. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. It felt like someone had pressed a branding iron against his entire left side. He did not let go of the princess. Station security moved fast. Alarms blared, and emergency shields snapped into place. Jake heard weapons fire and shouting in multiple languages. He kept the princess pressed against the floor, his body covering hers, even as the pain tried to pull him into unconsciousness. It was over in less than 30 seconds. Station security and the Velrathi guards subdued the attackers. Medics rushed toward Jake and the princess. Jake finally released his grip and rolled off of her, gasping for air. His shoulder felt like it was still burning. "Are you hurt?" Jake managed to ask the princess. His voice came out rough and strange. The princess stared at him with wide eyes, her colors shifting rapidly through shades Jake had no names for. She shook her head slowly. "You." She started to say something in her own language, then switched to the common trade tongue. "You covered me." "That is my job," Jake said. The medics were trying to check his wound, but he pushed them away. "Check the princess first. Make sure she is safe." Queen Teshvara appeared beside them. She moved faster than Jake would have thought possible. She knelt beside her daughter and ran her hands over the young princess, checking for injuries with the practiced movements of a worried mother. When she was satisfied that her daughter was unharmed, she turned to look at Jake. The queen's eyes were unlike anything Jake had seen before. They seemed to look into him rather than at him. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. "You did not hesitate," she said. "No time to hesitate," Jake replied. The pain was getting worse and he was starting to feel dizzy. "Someone was going to hurt her. You took a weapon meant for my daughter. You are badly injured. I will live." Jake tried to smile, but it probably looked more like a grimace. "She is safe. That is what matters." The queen continued to stare at him. Around them, security was securing the area and medical teams were treating the wounded. The three attackers were on the ground, restrained and unconscious, but Queen Teshvara seemed focused entirely on Jake. "I do not understand," she said finally. "You are not bonded to our house. You have no oath compelling you. You have not been conditioned for sacrifice. Yet you placed yourself between death and my daughter, without calculation or thought." Jake was having trouble focusing now. The medics were insisting and he was too tired to fight them anymore. As they started to move him toward a stretcher, he looked at the queen and gave her the only answer that made sense. "She needed help," he said simply. "What else would I do?" The last thing Jake saw before the pain medication took him was the expression on Queen Teshvara's face. She looked confused and amazed, and something else that he could not quite identify. Later, he would learn that the Velrathi had a word for it. They called it recognition. The moment when someone sees something they had only heard about in stories and realizes it is real. As Jake slipped into unconsciousness, Queen Teshvara turned to her guards and spoke in her native language. The words were formal and ancient, part of a law that had not been invoked in generations. The debt of crystal had been called, and nothing would ever be the same. Jake woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the gentle hum of medical equipment. His left shoulder was wrapped in something that felt cool and slightly tight. When he tried to move, a sharp reminder of pain told him that was a bad idea. "You should rest," a voice said from beside his bed. Jake turned his head carefully. A Velrathi medical specialist stood there, holding a data pad. Her coloring was more muted than the queen's, running toward pale greens and whites. "How long was I out?" Jake asked. 14 hours. Your injury was severe. The plasma burn went deep into the muscle tissue. Without our medical technology, you would have lost use of that arm." The specialist tilted her head in a gesture Jake was learning meant curiosity. "You are very fortunate. Is the princess okay?" "Princess Lysera is unharmed because of you. She has been asking to see you." Jake tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The specialist made a clicking sound that might have been disapproval and helped adjust his bed so he was propped up instead. "The attackers," Jake said. "Who were they?" "Velrathi extremists who believe contact with humans is dangerous to our culture. They have been dealt with." The specialist paused. "There is something you should know. Queen Teshvara has invoked an ancient law called the Debt of Crystal. Do you know what this means?" "No. In our culture, royal blood is sacred. Anyone who sheds their own blood to protect it becomes bound to the royal house. It is a permanent bond, deeper than friendship or alliance. You saved Princess Lysera's life. By our oldest laws, you are now connected to the royal family forever." Jake processed this slowly. "I was just doing my job." The specialist made that clicking sound again. "That is what makes it remarkable. You had no cultural context, no understanding of what it would mean. You simply acted. This is very unusual for us to witness. Before Jake could respond, the door to his medical room opened. Station Commander Phillips walked in, looking tired and stressed. Behind him came Queen Teshvara. Moving with that same impossible grace, Princess Lissazara followed her mother, staying close but watching Jake with intense interest. "Mr. Morrison," Commander Phillips said formally. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a plasma bolt, sir." Phillips almost smiled. "Queen Teshvara requested to speak with you. I will be outside if you need anything." The commander left, and suddenly Jake was alone with Velrothi royalty. He tried to sit up straighter, and winced. "Please do not injure yourself further on our account," Queen Teshvara said. She moved closer to his bed. "I have come to discuss the debt of crystal with you. Your medical specialist mentioned it. Your Majesty, I appreciate the honor, but I was just doing my job. You do not owe me anything." The Queen's colors shifted toward deeper blues. "That is not how this works. In our culture, the debt of crystal is not about what is owed. It is about what has been proven. You proved that you value my daughter's life above your own. This cannot be undone or dismissed." "I do not want to cause any problems," Jake said carefully. "You have not caused problems. You have created something we did not expect." The Queen gestured to her daughter. "Lissazara wished to speak with you herself." The princess stepped forward. Up close, Jake could see that her features were still developing. Her colors were brighter than her mother's, shifting constantly like emotions playing across her skin. "Thank you for saving me," the princess said in careful, practiced common tongue. "I have never been so frightened." "You are safe now," Jake said. "That is what matters." "Why did you not think about it? Everyone else would have calculated the risk. You just ran." Jake considered the question. "If I had stopped to think, I would have been too late. Sometimes you just have to act." "That..." The princess looked at her mother, then back to Jake. "We do not think like that. We are taught to always consider before acting. Our whole society is built on careful planning and tradition." "That sounds very organized." "It is. But it also means we sometimes do not know what to do when something unexpected happens." The princess moved closer. "Those attackers were Velrothi. They knew exactly how our guards would move during the ceremony. They counted on us following the pattern. You did not follow any pattern." Queen Teshvara spoke again. "This is why I have a request for you, Jake Morrison. I want you to join my delegation as a cultural liaison and guardian to my daughter." Jake blinked. "Your Majesty, I am not qualified to be a cultural liaison. I barely know anything about your people. That is exactly why you are qualified. You do not think like we do. You do not follow our patterns." The attack revealed something troubling. Our society has become so predictable that even our own people can exploit it. We need someone who thinks differently. "You want me to come to your home world?" "Yes, you would be the first human to visit Veltrasa. You would help us understand your species better, and you would protect my daughter. I have guards who are well-trained and loyal, but they all think the same way. You prove that different thinking can save lives." Jake looked at the princess, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. Then he looked at the Queen, who had the same expression he had seen before he passed out. Recognition. She saw something in humans that her people had forgotten or never had. "If I refuse?" Jake asked. "Then you refuse. The debt of crystal means you are honored by our house, but it does not make you a slave. You have free choice." The Queen paused. "But I believe you will not refuse. I believe humans have something we need to learn, and I think you want to understand what that is as much as I do." She was right. Jake had spent his whole life in security work, protecting things and people. It was good work, necessary work, but it was routine. This was something else entirely. This was a chance to bridge a gap between species, to help an ancient civilization understand something new. "I will need to finish my contract here first," Jake said. "Already arranged." Queen Teshvara said smoothly. Commander Phillips has agreed to release you from your duties. He believes this opportunity is too important to refuse. Jake had to laugh, which hurt his shoulder. You were very sure I would say yes. No, I was hopeful. There is a difference. Over the next few days, Jake learned more about what had happened. The investigation into the attack revealed that the three extremists had connections to the Torven Collective, a species that viewed humans with suspicion and fear. The Torven had been funding anti-human groups across multiple worlds, trying to prevent humanity from forming strong alliances. The princess visited Jake every day during his recovery. She asked endless questions about human culture, human history, and human thinking. Jake tried to answer as best he could, but it was difficult to explain things he had always taken for granted. Why do humans help strangers? She asked one day. Because they need help, Jake said. But you gain nothing from it. There is no logical benefit. Not everything needs a logical benefit. Sometimes things are just right to do. The princess looked confused. We have laws about what is right. You follow the laws, and society functions properly. But what about when the laws do not cover something, or when following the law would cause harm? Then you consult with elders and adjust the laws carefully over time. What if there is no time? What if someone needs help right now? The princess did not have an answer for that. She left looking thoughtful, her colors swirling in patterns Jake was starting to recognize as deep concentration. On Jake's last day at Harmony Point, Commander Phillips called him to his office. You sure about this, Morrison? The Velrathi are not like us. Their whole society operates on rules we barely understand. I know, sir. You will be alone there. No other humans. No backup if things go wrong. I understand the risks. Phillips studied him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Jake thought about the question. He thought about the princess asking why humans help strangers. He thought about Queen Teshvara's expression of recognition. Because they need something we have, Jake said finally. And because I want to see if we can learn something from them too. Understanding works both ways. Phillips nodded slowly. Good luck, Morrison. Something tells me you are going to need it. The next morning, Jake boarded the Velrathi diplomatic ship. It was sleek and beautiful. Built from materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid, Princess Lysizera was waiting at the airlock, practically bouncing with excitement. You came, she said happily. I said I would. I know, but some people say things they do not mean. I am learning that humans actually mean what they say. Jake smiled. Most of us try to. As the ship pulled away from Harmony Point, Jake watched the station shrink in the viewport. He was leaving behind everything familiar, heading into unknown territory with aliens he barely understood. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt right. Queen Teshvara appeared beside him. Ready for your journey, Jake Morrison? As ready as I can be, Your Majesty. Good. Because once we reach Veltrasa, everything will change. For you, and perhaps for my people as well. The ship jumped to faster than light speed, and Jake's new life began. The first sight of Veltrasa took Jake's breath away. The planet appeared in the viewport like a jewel hanging in space. Blues and silvers dominated the surface, with vast oceans and continents that seemed to shimmer even from orbit. As the ship descended, Jake saw cities that looked like they had grown from the ground rather than been built. Towers of crystal reached toward the sky, catching the light of the system's sun and throwing rainbows across the landscape. Beautiful, is it not? Princess Lysizara stood beside him at the viewport. She had been his constant companion during the 3-day journey. It is amazing, Jake said honestly. I have never seen anything like it. Our ancestors shaped the crystal formations over thousands of years. Each tower represents generations of careful work. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is careless. The ship landed at the royal palace, which sat at the center of the capital city. The palace was the largest structure Jake had ever seen, a massive complex of interconnected crystal towers that seemed to pulse with internal light. As he walked down the landing ramp, Jake felt the weight of countless eyes watching him. Hundreds of Velrathi had gathered to see the human who had saved their princess. They stood in perfect rows, silent, and still. Their colors were more subdued than the royal families, ranging through blues and greens and grays. Jake felt very small and very alone. Queen Teshvara led him through the palace gates. The interior was even more impressive than the outside. The walls seemed to glow with their own light. The floor was smooth crystal that showed reflections like perfect mirrors. Everything was clean and precise and organized. "You will have quarters in the East Tower," the queen said, "near the princess's chambers. You will also have access to our archives, so you can learn about our culture and history." "Thank you, Your Majesty. Tomorrow you will be formally presented to the court. They will want to see the human who invoked the debt of crystal." She paused. "Not all of them will be welcoming. Many of our nobles view humans as primitive and unpredictable. They are probably right about the unpredictable part." The queen's colors shifted in what Jake was learning to recognize as amusement. "Yes, that is what worries them." Jake's quarters were larger than his entire apartment back on Harmony Point. The walls were transparent crystal that could be adjusted for privacy. The furniture was elegant but not quite right for human proportions. Everything was slightly too tall or too narrow. It reminded Jake that he was very far from home. That night, Jake could not sleep. He stood at his window looking out over the crystal city. Lights moved through the towers in organized patterns. Everything followed rules here. Even the traffic moved in perfect synchronized flows. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. Princess Lissazara stood outside, looking nervous. "Is something wrong?" Jake asked. "I wanted to check on you. I know everything must be very strange." "It is different," Jake admitted. "But different can be good." The princess entered his quarters and looked around. "These rooms have not been used in many cycles. They were built for a delegation from the Kestri people, but that was before I was born." "What happened to the Kestri?" "They broke treaty agreements. They did not follow proper protocols. So we ended diplomatic relations." The princess sat down on one of the two tall chairs. "That is how things work here. There are rules for everything. If you follow the rules, you are welcome. If you break them, you are cast out." "That sounds harsh." "It is how we maintain order, how we have maintained it for thousands of years." The princess looked at him with those large, curious eyes. "But I have been thinking about what you said. About how sometimes there is no time to consult the rules. Sometimes, you just have to act. Your mother said something similar. My mother worries about our people. She does not say it openly, but I can see it in her colors. She thinks we have become too rigid, too predictable." Jake sat down across from her. "Is that why she really brought me here? Not just to protect you, but to show your people something different? Perhaps both. You are a puzzle to us, Jake Morrison. You do not fit our patterns. You do things that make no sense by our logic, yet they work. You saved me when our own guards could not. Even though our guards are trained from birth for protection. I had one advantage," Jake said. "I did not know what I was supposed to do, so I just did what needed to be done." The princess thought about this. That is a very human way of thinking. Over the following weeks, Jake learned about Velrathi society. Princess Lissazara became his guide and teacher. She showed him the proper way to greet nobles, the correct way to move through the palace, the appropriate topics for conversation. There were rules for everything. Rules for how to eat, how to speak, how to stand, how to show respect. Jake tried to follow the rules. He really did. But he kept making mistakes. During a formal dinner, he reached for food with the wrong hand. In a council meeting, he spoke before being acknowledged. He walked through a door that was meant only for nobles of a certain rank. Each mistake caused ripples of shock through the Velrathi observers. But Jake noticed something interesting. While the older nobles looked scandalized, the younger Velrathi watched him with fascination. They whispered to each other when they thought no one was listening. Jake was different. And difference was rare here. Queen Teshvara began involving Jake in security reviews. She wanted his perspective on the palace defenses, the guard rotations, the emergency protocols. Jake studied everything carefully. What he found worried him. "Your Majesty," he said during one of their private meetings. "Your security is very good for expected threats. But it has a fatal flaw." 2. Explain. Everything follows patterns. Your guards change shifts at exact times. They patrol the same routes every day. They respond to alarms in predictable ways. Anyone who studies your system can exploit it. Our system has worked for centuries. It worked because no one challenged it. The attack at Harmony Point proved that the moment someone thinks differently, the system breaks down. The Queen was quiet for a long time. Her colors shifted through deep blues and purples. "What do you suggest?" "Randomization. Change the patrol routes daily. Vary the shift times. Add unexpected drills. Make it so no one can predict exactly where your guards will be or how they will respond. That goes against our entire philosophy. We value order and predictability. I know, but your enemies value it too. They count on it." The Queen considered his words. "I will think on this. It is not a small change you suggest." Pot of ground. Jake spent more time with Princess Lysizara, teaching her things that had nothing to do with formal protocol. He taught her chess, a game that required thinking ahead but also adapting to unexpected moves. He taught her about human history, about the mistakes and triumphs and the messy way humanity learned and grew. He taught her that sometimes breaking the rules was necessary for survival. The princess absorbed everything like a sponge. She started asking questions that made her tutors uncomfortable. Questions like, "Why do we do things this way? And what if there is a better way?" The young heir to the Velrathi throne was starting to think differently, and it made the conservative nobles nervous. One evening, Jake was walking through the palace gardens when he noticed something odd. A shipment was being loaded into a service entrance, but it was not on any of the schedules he had reviewed. He watched from a distance as Velrathi workers moved containers quickly and quietly. Jake made a mental note and checked the supply records later. The shipment was not listed. He checked the guard logs. No one had noted anything unusual. He checked the security feeds and found that particular camera had been offline for maintenance during that exact time window. It might have been innocent. It probably was innocent. But Jake's instincts, honed by years of security work, told him something was wrong. He brought his concerns to Queen Teshvara the next day. "There was an unscheduled shipment last night. It was not in any official records." The Queen called in her chief of security, a stern Velrathi named Korval who had never warmed to Jake's presence. "The shipment was routine medical supplies," Korval said dismissively. "Delayed by transport issues. Not worth noting in the official records." "But the security camera was down," Jake pressed. "Scheduled maintenance. These things are planned months in advance, so it was coincidence that they happened at the same time?" Korval's colors shifted toward angry reds. "Are you suggesting incompetence in my security forces?" "I am suggesting that coincidences should be investigated. You have been here mere weeks and you think you understand our systems better than those of us who have devoted our lives to them?" Queen Teshvara held up a hand. "Peace, Korval. Jake raises a fair concern. Have the shipment contents verified and review the maintenance schedules." Korval bowed stiffly and left. Jake could tell the security chief resented him deeply. "He is not wrong," the Queen said after Korval departed. "You have been here only a short time. You do not fully understand how we operate." "That is exactly why I notice things," Jake said. "I do not have years of experience telling me what is normal. Everything looks unusual to me. So I question everything." The Queen's colors shifted thoughtfully. Perhaps that is valuable in itself. Over the next few days, Jake continued to observe. He noticed more small inconsistencies. Guard rotations that did not quite match the official schedules. Supplies that disappeared from inventory without explanation. Conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Something was happening in the Crystal Palace. Something hidden beneath the surface of perfect order. Jake could feel it the way he had felt the coming attack at Harmony Point. He tried to warn Princess Lysizara to be careful, to stay close to trusted guards. She listened but did not fully understand. How could she? She had lived her entire life in this palace, surrounded by the same faces, following the same routines. She had no context for suspecting the people around her. Jake understood something that the Velrathi did not. Perfection was an illusion. The more perfect something appeared, the easier it was to hide imperfection within it. The Velrathi trusted their systems absolutely, which made them blind to exploitation of those systems. He reported his concerns to the Queen multiple times. Each time, her advisors found reasonable explanations. The Velrathi had such faith in their institutions that they could not imagine those institutions being corrupted. But Jake remembered the attack at Harmony Point. He remembered how 3 Velrathi extremists had infiltrated a diplomatic ceremony. He remembered that they had been funded by the Torvin Collective, and he wondered if the Torvin were finished with their plans. The Festival of Lights was approaching, the most sacred celebration in Velrathi culture. The entire palace would be filled with people. Security would be stretched thin, covering all the events. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that an enemy would exploit. Jake tried to convince Queen Teshvara to increase security for the festival. She agreed to some measures but refused to disrupt the sacred traditions. The festival had been celebrated the same way for 1,000 years. To change, it would be unthinkable. Jake prepared as best he could. He memorized every exit and corridor in the palace. He studied the guest lists and noted anyone unfamiliar. He checked and rechecked his equipment, and he stayed close to Princess Lys's aura, because every instinct he had was screaming that danger was coming. The Festival of Lights began at sunset. The entire crystal palace glowed with artificial light that made it look like a star had fallen to earth. Thousands of Velrathi gathered in the grand halls, their formal robes shimmering with woven light threads. Music played from instruments Jake did not recognize, creating harmonies that seemed to make the air vibrate. Princess Lysizara wore ceremonial dress that made her look older than her years. Her colors were bright with excitement as she explained the significance of each ritual. Jake wore formal human clothing that the palace tailors had made for him, though he felt awkward and out of place. "The festival celebrates the founding of our empire," the princess said. "We honor the first queen who united our people under a single law." "It is beautiful," Jake said, though his eyes kept scanning the crowd. Too many people, too many blind spots, too many ways for something to go wrong. The ceremony followed ancient patterns. Queen Teshvara gave a formal speech from the central platform. Nobles presented gifts that represented different aspects of Velrathi culture. Children performed traditional dances. Everything was choreographed down to the smallest gesture. Jake positioned himself near the princess, close enough to react but far enough not to disrupt the ceremony. The royal guards stood at their designated posts, watching the crowd with the same attention they always had. Everything seemed normal. That was when the lights went out. Not just the festival lights. All lights. The entire palace went dark in an instant. Emergency lighting should have activated immediately. It did not. Jake heard gasps of confusion from the crowd, and the rustle of thousands of Velrathi trying to figure out what was happening. Then the shooting started. Energy weapons lit up the darkness like lightning. Jake saw Velrathi guards falling, hit by weapons fire from positions that should have been secure. The crowd panicked, pushing and shoving in the darkness. Screams echoed through the crystal halls. Jake grabbed Princess Lysizara's arm. "Stay with me. Move now." "But my mother. Your mother has guards. My job is you. Move." Training took over. Jake did not think about protocol or proper procedure. He pulled the princess away from the platform, using the chaos as cover. Energy bolts cut through the air where they had been standing seconds before. Jake's eyes adjusted faster than the Velrathi's. Humans evolved on a world with nights, with darkness and shadows. The Velrathi homeworld had less extreme day-night cycles. They were adapted for constant light. In the darkness, Jake had an advantage. He pulled the princess through a service corridor, away from the main celebration hall. Behind them, he could hear fighting. The royal guards were engaging the attackers, but they were confused and disoriented. The attack had come from within the palace, from positions the guards thought were secure. "Where are we going?" the princess asked. Her voice was shaking. "Away from the killing ground. Then we find your mother." Jake's communication device crackled. Queen Teshvara's voice came through, strained and urgent. Jake? Jake, can you hear me? I have the princess. She is safe. Your position? Trapped in the throne room. East wing. They are trying to breach the doors. How many attackers? Unknown. Dozens at least. They have been planning this. They knew our security protocols. They knew exactly where to strike. Jake cursed under his breath. The throne room was 3 levels up and half the palace away. Getting there would mean going through hostile territory. But leaving the queen trapped was not an option. I am coming to you, Jake said. Stay secure. Do not open those doors for anyone. All Lees. Jake, your duty is to my daughter. My duty is to both of you. We are coming. He ended the communication before the queen could argue. Princess Lissazara looked at him with wide eyes that reflected the distant weapons fire. You do not have to do this, she said. You could take me to the landing bays. Get me off the planet. That would fulfill your duty. Your mother is trapped. We are not leaving her. But the odds are better than you think. Come on. Jake led the princess through the servant passages he had memorized during his weeks in the palace. These corridors were not designed for combat. They were narrow and winding, meant for staff to move unseen. That made them perfect for avoiding the main attack forces. They encountered their first enemies at the junction near the gardens. 3 Velrothi, in dark combat gear, carrying weapons that looked more advanced than standard security equipment. They were checking their data pads, coordinating with others. Jake did not give them time to react. He was not a soldier, but he had trained with enough of them. He knew how to move fast and hit hard. The first attacker went down to a strike across the throat. The second managed to raise his weapon before Jake knocked it aside and drove an elbow into his face. The third actually got a shot off, but Jake had already moved, pulling the princess behind cover. The energy bolt hit the wall and superheated the crystal. Fragments exploded outward. Jake used the distraction to close distance, taking the third attacker down with a combination that ended with the Velrothi unconscious on the floor. Stay behind me, Jake said to the princess, who looked shocked. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? She nodded mutely. They kept moving. Jake took weapons from the unconscious attackers. He was not familiar with Velrothi firearms, but the basics were universal. Point and shoot. He hoped he would not need them. The palace was chaos. Different groups of guards were trying to organize resistance, but they were scattered and confused. The attackers had clearly spent months studying the security protocols. They knew exactly how the guards would respond and where they would gather. Jake did not respond like the guards. He took random paths, doubled back through corridors, used routes that made no tactical sense. Unpredictability was his only advantage. His communication device crackled again. This time, it was Corval, the security chief. All units, converge on the throne room. Protect the queen at all costs. Jake thought about that order. It made sense on the surface. Concentrate forces to protect the ruler. But it also meant drawing the guards away from other positions. It meant leaving large sections of the palace undefended. It is a trap, Jake said to the princess. They are herding the guards into a kill zone. How do you know? Because it is what I would do if I wanted to eliminate the security forces. Get them all in one place, then hit them with everything. They found a terminal in an empty office. Jake pulled up the palace schematics. The throne room had limited access points, each one a choke point that could be defended or turned into a trap. If the attackers had placed explosives or heavy weapons at those points, the responding guards would be massacred. We need to warn them, the princess said. No time. We need to get to your mother before they breach the throne room. Jake studied the schematics. There was one path that might work. The maintenance shafts that ran through the palace infrastructure. They were tight spaces, barely wide enough for a person, used for accessing power systems and ventilation. The attackers probably were not watching them because they were too small for rapid troop movement. But Jake was not moving troops. He was moving himself and one princess. We are going through the walls, he said. The maintenance shaft was cramped and uncomfortable. Jake went first, pulling himself through with his arms while pushing with his legs. The princess followed, struggling with her ceremonial robes. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of battle growing more intense. The shaft brought them out in a storage room, 2 corridors from the throne room. Jake checked the area carefully before emerging. Clear. They moved quickly and quietly. The throne room doors were massive crystalline barriers that could withstand significant force. They were currently sealed from the inside. Outside, Jake could see 24 attackers setting up breaching charges. They had plasma cutters and explosive devices. In minutes, they would be through. Jake counted enemies and calculated odds. 24 trained fighters with military equipment against 1 security consultant and a teenage princess. The smart move was to run, to get the princess to safety, and hope the throne room held. Jake had never been very good at doing the smart thing. "Stay here," he told the princess. "Do not come out no matter what happens." "What are you going to do?" "Something stupid." Jake still had the Velrothi weapons he had taken earlier. He checked the charge levels and found them full. He also had his sidearm, his human-made pistol, that had seemed inadequate next to alien technology. Now he was glad for its familiarity. He took a breath, centered himself, and then stepped out into the corridor. "Hey," he called out to the attackers, "you guys forgot to knock." 24 Velrothi turned to look at him. For a moment, no one moved. They were surprised, probably trying to figure out who the human was and how he had gotten there. Jake used that moment. He fired at the breaching charges they had set up. The weapons fired detonated them prematurely, causing explosions that threw attackers back from the doors. The throne room's barriers held, designed to withstand such forces. Then the shooting started in earnest. Jake dove behind a pillar as return fire turned the corridor into a light show. He popped out, took shots at exposed targets, and ducked back before they could aim properly. He kept moving, never staying in one place, making himself as hard to hit as possible. It was working, but barely. He was 1 person against 24. Sooner or later, the numbers would win. Inside the throne room, Queen Teshvara heard the explosion. She heard the weapons fire. She realized someone was fighting outside her doors. She gave orders to her guards, and the massive crystalline barriers began to open. The attackers, focused on Jake, did not notice until it was too late. Royal guards poured out from the throne room, catching the enemy in a crossfire. The battle turned from an execution into a fight. Jake took a plasma bolt to the leg and went down hard. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, worse than his shoulder wound from Harmony Point. He tried to get up and failed. Through his blurred vision, he saw an attacker approaching, weapon raised to finish him. Then Princess Lysizara was there, hitting the attacker with a piece of broken crystal she had picked up. It was not a sophisticated attack, but it was enough to make the Velrothi stumble. Jake found his sidearm and fired, dropping the attacker. "I told you to stay hidden," Jake gasped. "And I told you before," the princess said. "Humans do not follow orders when someone needs help." The fight ended quickly after that. The royal guards, finally free from the throne room, overwhelmed the attackers. The few enemies who survived tried to flee, but were captured. Jake lay on the floor, his legs screaming pain. Queen Teshvara knelt beside him, her colors showing something Jake had never seen before. "Fear. You should have run," she said. "You should have taken my daughter to safety." "Could not leave you," Jake managed. "Family does not leave family behind." The queen looked at him for a long moment. Then she placed her hand on his forehead, in what Jake would later learn was the highest gesture of respect in Velrothi culture. "You are right," she said softly. "Family does not abandon family. And you have proven yourself family today." Jake's vision was fading. The last thing he saw was Princess Lysizara holding his hand, her colors bright with worry, and he thought that maybe this was not such a bad way to go. Saving people who mattered. Then the medical teams arrived, and darkness took him. Jake woke up slowly, awareness returning in pieces. First came the sounds of medical equipment humming steadily, then the feeling of soft material beneath him, then the realization that he was not dead, which was somewhat surprising given how things had ended. He opened his eyes to find Queen Teshvara sitting beside his bed. "Your Majesty," he croaked. His throat felt like sandpaper. "You live," the Queen said simply. Her colors were muted, exhausted. The medical team was uncertain for a time. "Your injuries were severe. The princess? Safe. She has barely left your side. She is resting now in the next room. I finally convinced her to sleep." Jake tried to sit up and found that his leg was wrapped in the same kind of medical technology that had healed his shoulder. The pain was manageable, reduced to a dull ache. "How long?" 3 days. "You have been unconscious while the medical systems repaired the damage." The Queen leaned forward. "You should not have survived, Jake Morrison. The plasma burn went through your leg to the bone. You lost a dangerous amount of blood, yet you kept fighting until the threat was ended. Had to make sure you both were safe. Why?" The question was simple but profound. "You could have taken my daughter and fled. No one would have blamed you. Your duty was to protect her, not to throw your life away in a hopeless fight." Jake thought about how to answer. He was tired and hurt, and the words did not come easily. "Where I come from, we have a saying. We are only as strong as those we protect. If I had run, if I had left you to die, what would that have taught the princess? What kind of person would I be? A living person. Maybe. But I would have to live knowing I abandoned someone who needed help. That is not a life I want." The Queen's colors shifted through shades Jake had never seen before. "The attack has forced us to face uncomfortable truths. The Torvin Collective spent years infiltrating our society. They corrupted members of our palace staff, even some of our guards. They studied our patterns and protocols until they knew our systems better than we did ourselves. They nearly destroyed us using our own perfection against us. How many were involved? 43 Velrathi working for the Torvin. Some had been in place for years. They were patient and careful. And we never suspected because we trusted our systems absolutely." The Queen's voice held something Jake had not heard before. "Doubt. You warned us. Multiple times. And we dismissed your concerns because you did not understand our ways. We were fools. You were not fools. You just believed in your society. That is not a weakness. It becomes weakness when belief prevents adaptation. We have been so proud of our traditions, of our ancient ways, that we forgot the most important tradition of all. Survival requires change." Jake noticed something different about the Queen. Her posture was less formal. Her colors were more varied. She seemed somehow more real than before. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we rebuild, but differently." The Queen stood and walked to the window that looked out over the Crystal City. "I am enacting reforms that would have been unthinkable before the attack. Security protocols will be randomized, as you suggested. We will create oversight systems to monitor for corruption. We will teach our young ones to question, rather than simply obey. It will be difficult. Many of the older nobles oppose these changes. They say we are abandoning what makes us Velrathi. Are you? No. We are remembering what made us strong in the first place. Our ancestors were not perfect automatons following endless rules. They were survivors who built an empire through adaptation and courage. Somewhere over the millennia, we forgot that. We became so obsessed with maintaining perfection that we lost the ability to respond to imperfection." She turned back to face him. "You showed us what we had lost, not through words or arguments, but through action. You saw threats we could not see. You adapted when we could not adapt. You sacrificed when we would have calculated cost and benefit." The door opened, and Princess Lissazara rushed in, her colors bright with relief. "You are awake," the medical staff said. "You were showing signs, but I could not believe. Until I saw for myself. I am harder to kill than I look," Jake said with a smile. The princess laughed, and it was a sound Jake had never heard from a Velrathi before, pure and unguarded and joyful. "You scared me. You scared everyone. Do you know what you did? The palace is calling you the Shield of Crystal. They say you stood alone against impossible odds to protect the Queen. They say you are the greatest warrior in the Empire. I am not a warrior. I am just a security consultant who does not know when to quit. That is what makes it meaningful, the princess said seriously. Her young face showed wisdom beyond her years. A warrior follows orders. You followed your conscience. You chose to help not because it was your duty but because it was right. That is what humans do, is it not? You choose based on what is right, rather than what is prescribed. We try. We do not always succeed. Over the next weeks, as Jake recovered, he watched Velrathi society begin to shift. It was not a revolution but an evolution. Queen Teshvara appointed him to a newly created position, Adaptive Security Council. His job was to challenge assumptions, question protocols, and think like someone who did not know the rules. Other species began to take notice. The story of the human who saved the Velrathi queen spread throughout the galaxy. Humanity, which many civilizations had viewed as dangerous upstarts, gained new respect. If the ancient and wise Velrathi valued human judgment and courage enough to give one a position of honor, perhaps humans were worth understanding rather than fearing. The Torven Collective faced sanctions from multiple species for their actions. The evidence of their infiltration and attempted assassination could not be denied. They lost trade agreements and diplomatic standing. Their plot to prevent a human Velrathi alliance had the opposite effect, strengthening the bond between the two species. Princess Lysizara began training not just in Velrathi traditions but in human concepts. She studied human history, learning about the countless times humanity had faced impossible situations and adapted to survive. She learned about improvisation, creativity, and the human tendency to try new solutions when old ones failed. When I become queen, she told Jake one day as they walked through the palace gardens, I want to rule a people who can both honor our past and embrace our future. You have shown us it is possible to be both traditional and adaptive. Your mother is the one making it happen, Jake said. I just pointed out some problems. You did more than that. You showed us what courage looks like when it is not scripted or rehearsed. You showed us that sometimes the bravest thing is to act without knowing if you will succeed. Jake watched the princess as she spoke. She had grown in the months since the attack. Her colors were more confident now, shifting less with uncertainty. She would make a good queen someday, he thought, maybe even a great one. The reforms continued. The Velrathi military began incorporating random elements into their strategies. Their diplomats learned to negotiate without following rigid scripts. Their scientists started taking creative approaches to problems rather than methodically working through established procedures. It was uncomfortable for many. Some older Velrathi mourned the loss of absolute certainty, but most saw the value in what they were gaining. 6 months after the attack, Queen Teshvara held a ceremony in the Grand Hall. The hall had been rebuilt after the damage, but it was different now. Less rigid in its design, more open to natural light and organic shapes. The change was symbolic. Jake stood before the assembled court, feeling awkward in formal robes. Queen Teshvara addressed the crowd in her own language, then switched to the common tongue so Jake could understand. Jake Morrison came to us as a stranger. He saved my daughter, not because he understood our culture but because he did not need to understand it. He saw a person in danger, and acted. That simple, instinctive choice revealed a truth we had forgotten. The highest laws are not written in books or encoded in traditions. They are written in the heart. Compassion, courage, sacrifice. These are universal. She turned to Jake. You have been named Shield of Crystal, but that title is not enough. Today, I name you Velthos, Guardian of the Throne. No outsider has held this title in 300 years. You will stand beside my family, not as a servant, but as an equal. Your voice will carry weight in our councils. Your judgments will guide our decisions. And when my daughter takes the throne, you will be there to remind her that wisdom comes from many sources. The hall erupted in a sound Jake had learned was the Velrathi equivalent of applause. A thrumming that came from their bodies vibrating in harmony. It was beautiful and overwhelming. Later, after the ceremony ended, Jake found himself alone with Queen Teshvara and Princess Lysizara in the royal garden. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" the queen asked. "For trusting me. For listening when I warned you. For being willing to change." "We should thank you," Princess Lysizara said. "You changed our world. Not with force or demands, but by showing us what we could be." "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Queen Teshvara said firmly. "You did what humans do. And that is why the galaxy needs humanity. Not because you have the best weapons or the fastest ships, but because you have something rarer. You have the courage to act without certainty. You have the compassion to help without calculation. You have the strength to stand against impossible odds because you believe it is right." Jake looked up at the alien sky, at the stars that were different from Earth's stars. He thought about how far he had come, how much had changed, how a simple security consultant had somehow become part of an alien royal family. "You know what the funny thing is," he said. "I still do not fully understand your culture. I still make mistakes with your protocols. I still think differently than you do." "That is not a funny thing," the princess said. "That is the whole point. We do not want you to become Velrathi. We want you to remain human. We need humans to think like humans, to see what we cannot see, to question what we take for granted. Your people are lucky to have you both," Jake said. "And I am lucky to know you." They stood together in the garden as the sun set, casting colors across the crystal city. Human and Velrathi, different in so many ways but united by something simple and profound, the understanding that doing what is right matters more than following what is easy. Across the galaxy, the story continued to spread. The tale of the human who defended an alien princess and earned a queen's eternal devotion. It became a story that other species told, a reminder that heroism did not require grand gestures or perfect plans. Sometimes it just required seeing someone who needed help and choosing to act. And in the Crystal Palace of Veltrasa, Jake Morrison stood watch, a human guardian in an alien world, proving every day that the best things in life cannot be calculated or predicted. They can only be chosen, one moment of courage at a time. The future was uncertain, as all futures are. But it was a future that both species would face together, learning from each other, growing stronger through their differences, and that, Jake thought, was worth every scar he had earned along the way. In the end, the greatest gift humanity gave the Velrathi was not technology or military strength. It was perspective, the reminder that perfection is not the absence of flaws, but the courage to face them. That strength comes not from rigid adherence to tradition, but from the flexibility to adapt while honoring what matters most. And what matters most, Jake had learned, was simple. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Stand up when others fall. Choose courage over comfort. These were not human values or Velrathi values. They were universal values, waiting to be recognized by those willing to see them. As the stars came out over the crystal city, Jake smiled. He was far from home, surrounded by aliens, living a life he never could have imagined. But he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Some people search their whole lives for purpose. Jake had found his by simply being willing to help when help was needed. And in doing so, he had changed not just his own life, but the course of 2 civilizations. That was the human way. That was the way of courage, and it would echo across the galaxy for generations to come.